There's a strange kind of silence that settles over a vineyard at dusk, soft, golden, expectant. I remember standing at the edge of my cousin's wedding, smoothing out the sleeve of a borrowed blazer, watching the sunlight filter through rows of grapevines, and realizing just how invisible I'd become in my own family's story. My name is Evelyn Hart, and for as long as I can remember, I was the quiet one. Maybe you've been there too, the person who's always in the photo, but never at the center, always reliable, but rarely remarkable. Weddings are funny that way. They bring out the best performances from everyone. Champagne smiles, perfectly tailored suits, stories polished by years of retelling. In a family like mine, where every achievement seemed to shine brighter than the last, it was easy to believe that worth was something you could measure in diplomas, framed on hallway walls, in the square footage of your apartment, or the handshake of a father who never missed a board meeting. My brother Thomas with his Wall Street bravado, my sister Lauren already partner at her law firm. Our family had its favorite roles, and mine was always backstage. But life doesn't stay quiet forever. Sometimes the stories we tell about ourselves begin to shift, even when no one else is listening. Sometimes the smallest acts, choosing a different major, renting a modest apartment, staying late in a laboratory, long after everyone else has gone home, begin to stack up into something that changes everything. Maybe that's why I felt a strange sort of calm on the evening of Rachel's wedding. I was no longer hiding from my story. I was simply waiting for the right moment to begin sharing it. If you've ever felt overlooked, if you've ever wondered what might happen if you stepped out of the shadow and finally spoke your truth, this story is for you. Over the next 30 minutes, I'll take you through a journey of quiet battles, unexpected victories, and the delicate work of healing the places where love and ambition collide. Because sometimes the quietest voices have the most to say if only someone will listen. So before we step into the celebration, before the music swells and the secrets come tumbling out, let me ask you, when was the last time you truly saw yourself, not through someone else's expectations, but through your own eyes? Tonight beneath the vineyard lights, my family will finally see me not just as the quiet one, but as Evelyn, the woman I was always meant to become. And maybe, just maybe, you'll see a piece of your own journey reflected in mine. Let's begin. Growing up in the Hart family meant living beneath a ceiling of expectations so high you could barely see the sky. My father, Robert, ran his company with the precision of a symphony conductor, every detail accounted for, every result measured. My mother, Deborah, had a knack for turning even dinner conversations into impromptu seminars on world affairs. Around our table, ambition was the family recipe, and everyone knew the ingredients by heart. To belong, you learned early how to recite your grades, your test scores, your future plans, all while passing the mashed potatoes. I remember being 8 years old, clutching a crayon drawing I'd poured my heart into. It was a messy portrait of our family, all crooked smiles and wild colors. I wanted nothing more than for my parents to put it on the fridge. Instead, Dad glanced up from his email, nodded absently, and asked if I'd finished my math homework. In that moment, I realized attention in our house was earned, not given. If your achievement didn't fit the script honor roll, varsity early acceptance, it was met with polite indifference, quickly replaced by talk of stock prices or someone's scholarship. This wasn't just my family, it was nearly every high-achieving household on our block. My best friend Julia's mom measured affection in piano recitals and science fairs, her dad in summer internships and college prep courses. I once overheard Julia whisper, "Sometimes I wish I could just paint for fun," but she smiled, put on her medal, and never missed a note. We were all learning the same lesson: love felt safest when you performed for it. The cost. Sometimes you forgot who you were beneath all the striving. Looking back, I see now how easy it is for families to confuse love with expectation. When everyone is chasing the same finish line, it can feel risky to slow down or take a detour. But the truth is, the people who love us most can still make mistakes, especially when their love is tangled up in fear. My parents didn't want to lose me to failure. They wanted to protect me from disappointment. What they didn't realize was that real growth comes from allowing each person to find their own definition of success, even if it looks nothing like the family blueprint. If you've ever felt the weight of someone else's dream pressing down on your own, you're not alone. In America, the land of possibility, Sometimes the greatest challenge is daring to want something different. The lesson I learned quietly and painfully is that acceptance isn't about meeting someone else's standard. It's about being brave enough to ask what truly matters to you. Sometimes that means disappointing people, even the ones you love most. As the laughter and toasts echoed across the vineyard, I wondered how many other guests wore invisible masks, trying to fit a mold that wasn't theirs. What would happen, I thought, if just one person chose another path? If someone finally listened, not just to what was expected, but to what was needed? That's the question that shaped my life, and it's the one that led me to the road less traveled. In the next part, I'll share how one quiet act of defiance became the first step toward becoming myself. The turning point in my story didn't arrive with fireworks or shouting matches. It came quietly, like a change in the weather. I remember sitting at our kitchen table the spring I turned 18, a stack of college acceptance letters in front of me. My father was certain I'd choose Yale Law just as my sister had. He'd arranged a dinner with a family friend, the dean, just to get you started on the right path. My mother bought me a tailored blazer navy blue, perfect for your first legal internship. But inside, I felt a growing restlessness, a longing to follow a different dream. One evening, while everyone else was out, I opened the last envelope. It was from MIT offering a place in their physics program. My heart skipped. Physics had always been my secret love, the puzzle solving, the thrill of uncovering the universe's hidden code. I'd stayed up late watching documentaries, scribbling equations in the margins of my notebooks. Still, I hesitated. What would my family say if I veered off their map? That night, I called my friend Julia. Her advice was simple and clear. It's your life, Ev. You get to decide what story you want to tell. Making my choice wasn't easy. I wrote my parents a letter explaining why I couldn't spend my life in a courtroom when I was called to a laboratory. My father didn't speak to me for weeks. My mother cried quietly as she folded my sweaters for Boston. Even Thomas and Lauren shook their heads, convinced I'd regret walking away from a guaranteed future. But for the first time, I wasn't paralyzed by their disappointment. I felt scared, yes, but also free, as if a door I'd never noticed had suddenly swung open. Those first months in Boston were lonely, filled with cheap instant noodles and late-night library sessions. My dorm room was tiny, the winters brutal, and the coursework relentless. But every challenge was laced with a sense of discovery. I met people who saw beauty in numbers, who argued passionately about quantum mechanics in crowded coffee shops. For once, I was surrounded by peers who encouraged my curiosity instead of urging me to play it safe. I learned that the world was far bigger than my family's expectations. And that courage often means trusting yourself, even when no one else does. Looking back, I realized this was my first real act of self-definition. I wasn't running from my family, but toward the possibility of something truer. The lesson was simple. It's okay to disappoint people if it means being honest about who you are. Sometimes choosing yourself is the bravest thing you can do, and sometimes it's the only way you'll ever find out what you're truly capable of. As I watched Rachel's wedding guests laughing under strings of fairy lights, I wondered how many of them had stories like mine, quiet rebellions, dreams that broke the mold. In the next part, I'll share how success is measured in more than just titles and paychecks, and how I learned that the world's standards and my own were never meant to be the same. When I entered the world of research and technology, I quickly realized that success was measured very differently from the way it had been in my family's living room. In academia, your value wasn't displayed on a wall or captured in a single trophy. It was debated in long nights over takeout food tested by failed experiments, and reflected in the slow, painstaking progress of discovery. The people I met at MIT weren't chasing corner offices, they were chasing questions. For the first time, I began to question what success really meant for me. Was it a number in a bank account, or was it waking up excited to solve a problem no one else had cracked? My early days at Cypher Quanta, the quantum security startup I co-founded, were nothing like the glossy magazine stories. There were no fancy offices, just a cramped lab, a few battered laptops, and a handful of people who believed in something bold. I remember presenting our ideas to investors who barely hid their skepticism. It's too theoretical, they'd say. Is there even a market for this? When we failed our first government grant proposal, I spent the night reworking the code alone, wondering if my family had been right after all. Still, I kept going, fueled by the tiniest wins, a successful simulation, and encouraging email from a mentor. One of the most humbling lessons came during a particularly tough quarter. Our only client nearly backed out after a technical glitch exposed a flaw in our encryption protocol. My co-founder and I spent 3 days sleeping in the lab, rewriting code, and calling in favors from old professors. I was exhausted and anxious, but also strangely alive. That week, I realized something crucial: real success is rarely a straight line. It's a winding path littered with setbacks and small victories that only you can truly appreciate. I learned to celebrate progress, not just results. A close friend from MIT, Nathan, once told me, if your work feels impossible, it's probably important. He dropped out of a lucrative job offer to teach coding to kids in Detroit, trading a high salary for the chance to make a difference. At first, I didn't understand his choice. Now, watching the impact his students had on their communities, I finally did. It was a reminder that there's no single yardstick for success, and what matters most is living in alignment with your own values, even if the world doesn't always understand. If you've ever compared yourself to someone else's definition of achievement, you know how heavy that burden can feel. The truth is, only you can decide what makes your journey worthwhile. For me, it was no longer about impressing my family or fitting into their mold. It was about doing meaningful work, building something from scratch, and holding on to the belief that I could make a difference, even if no one else noticed. As the music drifted through the vineyard and laughter rose over clinking glasses, I wondered how many of us were quietly redefining success on our own terms. In the next part, I'll share the darkest moments, when I almost gave up, and what kept me going even when the world felt impossibly heavy. There's a silence that settles over a lab late at night, a kind of hush that feels both comforting and crushing. I remember one particular winter evening when the Boston snow was falling heavy, and the city outside our windows had all but disappeared. We were behind on payroll, the latest round of funding had fallen through, and an investor I trusted deeply pulled out at the last moment. My co-founder called his parents for help. I stared at my phone for an hour, debating whether to do the same, but I knew what my father would say. I told you this was too risky. That night, I nearly quit. I wrote an email to my old professor at MIT, asking if there might be a research assistant job open for the spring. I typed and deleted that message 3 times. Each time I hovered over send, I pictured what it would feel like to walk away, not just from the company, but from the promise I'd made to myself. Sometimes it's easier to consider quitting than to admit how much you care about something. I realized then that what kept me going wasn't pride, but purpose. If I gave up now, I'd always wonder who I could have become if I'd held on a little longer. It wasn't just the business that weighed on me. The loneliness was sharper than any financial struggle. My friends from home were celebrating promotions, weddings, and new apartments. Holiday gatherings were hardest. I'd fly home and sit quietly as my siblings recounted their triumphs. No one ever asked how the company was going, maybe because they assumed they already knew the answer. More than once, I heard Thomas mutter to Lauren, "She'll come around eventually." But I didn't want to come around. I wanted to hold my ground, even if I stood there alone. One night, when the doubt felt like too much to carry, I remembered something my grandmother used to say: "The only way out is through." She'd survived far harder winters than I could imagine, raising 4 children on her own, building a small bakery from nothing. Her words echoed in my mind as I closed my laptop and made tea in the quiet kitchen. I realized then that grit isn't just about being tough. It's about choosing hope again and again, especially when you have every reason not to. That lesson became my anchor during the hardest months. If you're facing your own season of doubt, know that you're not alone. Everyone I admire has a story of nearly giving up a moment when the world went quiet and the only voice left was their own. Those nights in the lab were my crucible, the place where I forged resilience I didn't know I had. And it was in those quiet hours that CipherQuanta finally had its breakthrough. In the next part, I'll share how one unexpected success changed everything, not just for the company, but for me and for the people who finally began to see me in a new light. Sometimes the smallest spark can light up even the darkest night. For us, that spark came in the most unexpected way. We'd spent months refining our quantum encryption model, patching code, and revising algorithms until the numbers finally started to make sense. But no investor call, no pitch deck ever quite landed. Then one afternoon, as I prepared to leave for yet another discouraging meeting, I got an email from a cybersecurity professor in Switzerland. He'd seen our latest research paper online, and his university wanted to test our technology on their medical data project. It was our first real shot at proving our work mattered beyond theory. We threw ourselves into the project, working with the Swiss team late into the night, sometimes fighting sleep just to troubleshoot one last bug. I'll never forget the moment we watched our protocol protect a live stream of hospital records data that would have been vulnerable to cyber attacks just weeks earlier. For the first time, I saw in real time how our work could protect people, not just impress reviewers. When their IT director emailed us calling our breakthrough a quantum leap for healthcare, I couldn't help but tear up. All the frustration, all the nights I almost quit, suddenly felt worthwhile. Word traveled quickly in the close-knit research world. Soon we received invitations to present at global conferences. Suddenly, the same investors who'd brushed us off were asking to book meetings. But what stayed with me most was a single message from a nurse in Geneva who wrote to say that our technology had given her confidence, her patients' records were truly safe. That message reminded me of my grandmother, of all the people who keep going quietly doing vital work that often goes unseen. It wasn't about recognition, it was about service. Through this, I learned something powerful. Success isn't always loud or public. Sometimes it arrives as a quiet validation, a small thank you that means more than $1 million deal. It's easy to chase applause and headlines, but the work that matters most often grows in the dark, watered by faith and persistence. When I looked back on all the setbacks and sleepless nights, I realized they'd built a resilience nothing else could. Our little company wasn't just surviving, it was starting to make a difference. As the night wore on at Rachel's wedding, I watched my relatives celebrate with an ease I envied. But deep down, I no longer felt separate or less than. I'd found my worth not in their approval, but in the quiet certainty that I was finally doing something real. In the next part, I'll share how in a single unexpected moment, everything changed at home, and how one family gathering forced the truth into the open in ways none of us could have imagined. Family gatherings have a way of exposing both our best performances and our oldest wounds. At Rachel's wedding, as glasses clinked and toasts floated through the air, I mostly kept to the edge, listening to familiar stories told in the same proud voices. My parents moved through the crowd, beaming with the easy confidence of people who believe their lives have unfolded as planned. But then in one unscripted moment, everything shifted. A guest from Europe, a director of digital security whom I'd corresponded with, recognized me. With a warm handshake, he announced to my father that Cypher Quanta's work was now protecting hospital data in Switzerland. The silence that followed was electric. My father's smile faltered, and my brother, mid-laugh, glanced over in confusion. The director praised the project, explaining how it had become a reference point for medical cybersecurity. Suddenly, relatives who had barely nodded my way were watching with new curiosity. My heart thudded. I'd spent years minimizing my achievements, not out of shame but out of self-preservation. Now, in the glare of the family spotlight, I felt exposed, seen in a way I hadn't been since childhood, but also strangely vulnerable. My father's questions came quickly tumbling over one another. What exactly did we build? How had I managed all of this without their guidance? For a moment, I saw genuine awe flicker in his eyes, mixed with regret for all the times he'd dismissed my path as a detour. My mother hugged me tightly, her voice trembling, as she apologized for not asking more, for assuming she already knew what mattered most to me. It was awkward, imperfect, and more real than any conversation we'd had in years. Sometimes truth can only find space when pride is forced to step aside. In that whirlwind, I noticed something important. The people who love us can hold on to old versions of us for so long that they stop seeing who we're becoming. My family had clung to their image of me, the quiet, bookish daughter, because it was comfortable. But growth demands that we let go of outdated stories. It takes humility to ask real questions, and even more to listen with an open heart. That day, my parents and siblings began to do just that, and so did I. Maybe you've had a moment like this when the truth finally unexpectedly comes to light. It's messy, a little raw, but it's also the start of real connection. I learned that change doesn't happen all at once. It begins in those uncomfortable pauses, the stumbles, and half-finished apologies. In the next part, I'll share how we learned to navigate this new honesty as a family, and how redefining our relationships became the foundation for something stronger than pride, real understanding. After the dust settled that evening, my family and I found ourselves orbiting each other differently, curious, awkward, and a little hesitant. The next morning, instead of their usual routine, my parents invited me for coffee on the back porch, sunlight softening the edges of an unfamiliar conversation. My father, who usually filled silences with stories of market wins, simply asked, "Can you tell us more about what you've built?" For the first time, there was no judgment or expectation, just a genuine desire to understand. It felt as if we were all learning a new language together, clumsy but honest in our efforts. I explained the basics of quantum encryption in the simplest terms I could muster. I compared our technology to a lock with infinite keys, where even the smartest criminal couldn't pick the right one without changing the lock entirely. My mother, who once worried I was chasing shadows, listened intently and asked how it could protect sensitive information in hospitals or schools. When I shared the story of the Geneva nurse and how our work safeguarded patient lives, I saw my father's eyes well with pride, a look I'd quietly longed for since childhood. It wasn't all smooth. My brother Thomas still struggled, peppering me with technical questions, half out of sibling rivalry, half out of fascination. Lauren, my sister, admitted she'd Googled quantum security in bed that night, trying to make sense of it. There were moments when old habits returned, interruptions, gentle jabs, skeptical jokes, but each time we caught ourselves and tried again. We laughed at our stumbles, at how hard it was to break patterns shaped over decades. Real listening, I realized, is a skill families rarely practice until life forces them to. One evening, my mother shared something that surprised me. She confessed that she had always equated love with keeping us on the right path, and that she now understood how that had pushed me away. "I thought I was protecting you," she said. "But maybe what you needed was room to grow." That vulnerability cracked open a door between us. I assured her that her love, though sometimes misguided, was always felt, and that forgiveness was easy when we finally spoke, as equals, not as project and protector. If you've ever wanted your family to really see you, you know how hard it can be to break through old ways of being. But I've learned that real connection starts with curiosity and humility from both sides. It's not about perfect understanding, but about the willingness to ask to listen and to try again after missteps. In the next part, I'll share how this new spirit of openness led us to rewrite not just our relationships, but our sense of what family and success could mean together. As our conversations grew more honest, something shifted in the rhythm of our family. My father, once stubbornly self-reliant, surprised me by asking for my thoughts on how technology could strengthen his own company's operations. He didn't do this to show off. He genuinely wanted to learn to bridge the gap between his world and mine. My mother started suggesting ways we could use our newfound openness to help others, even bringing up the idea of hosting community workshops for parents and kids interested in science. For the first time, our talents felt like gifts to be shared, not points to be scored. My siblings also found new ways to participate. Thomas offered to connect me with his friends in finance, not as a rescue, but as a gesture of respect for my expertise. Lauren, with her legal mind, volunteered to help navigate some tricky patent issues for CipherQuanta. These small actions felt like apologies, but more importantly, like invitations into each other's lives. We discovered that it wasn't too late to build something new together, a family culture grounded in support, not silent rivalry. The old script of competition faded, making space for collaboration. Beyond our household, the ripple effects surprised me. Friends who once only heard from me at holidays began to reach out for advice or just to share encouragement. My parents, once hesitant about my path, bragged to neighbors not about my titles, but about how our work had protected children's medical records in Switzerland. I was invited to speak at local high schools, and a mother once told me with tears in her eyes that my story gave her daughter the courage to apply for a STEM scholarship. These moments reminded me that success, when shared, multiplies far beyond our original dreams. The biggest lesson was that families, like individuals, can evolve. We learned that it's never too late to start over, to try again with more kindness and less fear. I realized that pride can build walls, but curiosity can build bridges. We stopped trying to mold each other into our own image and started asking, "What does happiness look like for you?" There were still misunderstandings, and sometimes old habits crept back in. but we'd found a new blueprint, one rooted in listening and respect. If you've ever wished for a fresh start with the people you love, know that transformation is possible, even after years of misunderstanding. It begins with a single question, a single act of vulnerability, and grows from there. In the final part, I'll share how these changes shaped not only our family's future, but also my own sense of purpose, and why I believe sharing our stories can create revolutions of belonging one family at a time. Looking back, it's clear that our story was never about quantum technology or accolades. It was always about the quiet work of learning to see and believe in one another. The journey began with a sense of invisibility, of living in the shadows of expectation, and grew through moments of doubt, grit, and lonely nights in a distant city. With every risk I took to be myself, every honest conversation, and every gentle question from a family member, willing to try again, the distance between us slowly faded. We found new ways to connect built on curiosity, not criticism. The turning point wasn't a headline or a handshake from an industry leader, but those small moments at the kitchen table or in the garden where vulnerability met understanding. Our family didn't become perfect overnight. There were still stumbles, awkward apologies, nervous laughter, and old stories retold out of habit. But what changed was the willingness to listen and the courage to ask real questions. Together, we learned that success isn't just about being recognized. It's about lifting others up and letting them shine in their own light, even if their path is unfamiliar. In sharing my work, my struggles, and my victories with my family, I saw that transformation is a shared journey. The lessons that carried us: choosing your own dream, weathering disappointment, forgiving old hurts, and celebrating each step forward, are lessons every family can learn no matter where they start. We realized that it's never too late to break out of old roles or to rewrite the rules of love and support. Success grows when we share it, and belonging deepens when we make space for each other's differences. If you've ever felt misunderstood or underestimated, I hope our story offers comfort and hope. Your voice matters, even if it shakes at first. Sometimes the smallest act of honesty can open doors to healing you never imagined. You don't have to wait for a dramatic twist or a big award. Your quiet persistence, your willingness to begin again, can create ripples of change in the lives around you. We're all works in progress, but together we can write new chapters, ones filled with compassion, courage, and real connection. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If Evelyn's story touched something inside you, or if you've ever wished your own story could be heard, I'd love to read your thoughts in the comments. Let's build a community where every voice matters. If you found meaning here, please subscribe, like, and share this story. Not just for me, but for every quiet fighter out there, proving one honest moment at a time that true worth is never measured by approval, but by the courage to be yourself.